Welcome to Blind Spots, a podcast where we're helping you fill the gap between what you want to do with your money and what you actually do. We are professional investors, writers, and financial planners helping you navigate the complexities of finance to optimize what you can control and cut out the rest. Join your host, Nick Shermans and Aaron Varghese, as we discuss the questions and nuances surrounding everyday money management.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Blind Spot.
Nick sent me an email
that he received that had a bunch of data points, stats, kind of headlines for relevant news and topics. So we're just going to kind of chat through some of them. Finance, economics, financial planning related. So let's get into it.
So is this fact or fiction? Because I don't remember sending an email. I send a lot of stuff to you guys.
It's not fact or fiction. That's kind of the direction that I was headed with this, but it's more, this is what's going on in the world. So here's just kind of some interesting things. So this one was titled The 5% Frontier. This came from Wallet Hub. And they said, combining property, income, sales, and excise tax, the average total tax burden for individual states is about 8.35%. These other states are much higher. New York, Hawaii, Vermont, Maine, California, and Connecticut all have total tax burdens of at least 10%, while Alaska is the only state in the U.S. with less than 5%.
So can you rattle off the flavors of tax again? I got excise tax.
Excise, sales, income tax, property tax. So when we talk about where you live, how it impacts your expenses, I thought this was just kind of an interesting data point. A lot of people look at income taxes and state income taxes, but there's a lot more that also goes into it as well.
Which factors into your cost of living. And then that's the hard stuff, the tax, but also proximity to a hospital, healthcare, airports if you like to travel. So there's the hard side and the soft side. One thing that did not include was the death tax, right? Which is something that we just talked about.
You're right. And not everyone's going to be subject to that, but that certainly would factor into that 5% plus number at some point, not during your lifetime, but afterwards potentially. But does 5% surprise you?
I think when you add in all those things, that seems about right. And then there's all these hidden taxes, like the things I just mentioned. Like if you really like to travel and you live 5 hours from the closest airport, that's probably a hidden tax.
Sure, maybe. It's probably not a tax, but expense for sure.
Well, it's a time commitment. It's a tax on your time. It's probably a tax on hassle. So some of those other things I think about, but certainly the death tax, while it doesn't apply to everyone, as you pointed out, many of our clients are in Oregon and Washington. Those thresholds, death tax thresholds, are a lot lower, which means if you have an estate over a certain amount, you could owe a pretty sizable chunk of your estate to taxes, which means less goes to charity, less goes to your heirs. So backing up, what I think you're getting at is, we're big on focusing on the things that you can control. Choosing where you retire, where you put your flag in the ground, really does matter. It really is a key input to any financial plan.
Mm-hmm. And I think zooming out when you're looking at total taxes or even just expenses, if you want to go that route, taking into consideration all of these other things makes an impact. Because, if you think about, let's say you live in Oregon, you pay 25% federal tax, 10% state income tax, so you're at 35%. When you start factoring in all of those other things, when you look to see where your money is going, you could be closer to, 40, 45% of all of your income is going to these taxes and expenses. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. And it affects your cost of living. It affects how much you take from your portfolio. Obviously, it affects your taxes. It could affect the run rate of your investable assets. So it's not the worst idea just to toy with various locations in the context of your financial plan to see how it works out from a tax standpoint. It's going to be tough to recreate from a lifestyle standpoint. Like, you don't know what it's like to live in Montana if you've never lived in Montana, unless you start living in Montana. So there's the softer side to it, but certainly it helps to frame some of these scenarios just so you're not going in blind.
All right, here's the other side of the life spectrum, maybe. This one was titled Pampered Care. This came from Child Care Aware. And they said that the average annual cost of childcare for 2 children in 2023 exceeded the average annual mortgage payment in 45 states and the average annual cost of rent in all 50 states.
So this is both parents working, needing to place your pre-K child in childcare.
Yep.
Daycare, essentially.
Sure. And the cost to do that for 2 kids in most places is more expensive than the cost to live, whether you have a mortgage or you're renting.
I would believe that. I have several friends, both spouses work, and I'm shocked at what they pay for daycare. And a lot of parents are into this. You know, there's all these specialized schools. Certainly you're paying up for all that, but some of the monthly dues, if you will, are well above what I pay for my mortgage. So that does not surprise me.
The least affordable states, kind of going back to where you live, is Hawaii, Oregon, Vermont, and New York. So I don't know what about those states bumps up the cost of childcare, but that's where it's most expensive.
Well, and I think a lot of parents, including me and my wife, you start to pencil things out. Like my wife's a nurse, and at some point she talked about going back to work, working a few days a week, which means our youngest son would have to go into a daycare. We priced a couple daycares and it worked out to like $2,000 or $3,000 a month. And she's like, well, I probably wouldn't even make that if I'm working a few days a week. So I think a lot of parents are facing that question, and it's tough too, because it sucks to have to trade off your career endeavors or your passion for getting stretched on the childcare side. So that's something hopefully we can figure out, because it really does disincentivize families to have kids. And I know it's only for a stretch of a few years, but it does create a financial burden for a lot of households.
Especially if you're having multiple kids. I was talking to a client about this recently. You know, they're almost out of the woods with one of them starting into, kindergarten or first grade. And now the next one is a baby and finally eligible to go into some kind of childcare. And so now it kind of starts those years all over again.
But the flip side of that is once you're in kindergarten, like my youngest, who's going to be in kindergarten this fall, was in preschool. He was only there for like 3 hours, 3 days a week, but it still costs money. And that was more for social purposes, but he's done with that. So I don't have to pay that anymore. He's in school. So it's like a mini fist bump.
It's a big win.
You're right.
All right. Moving on. This one came from Market Watch. They titled it Know Your Options. So I thought this was kind of interesting, and I've seen this talking to clients as well throughout the last couple of years. But this one says depositors have access to options that pay higher levels of interest than the average of 0.08% paid in a traditional checking account. But most people don't know about it. 42% of Americans don't know what a money market account is, and 32% aren't familiar with a certificate of deposit or a CD. Surprised? Not surprised.
I'm not surprised. And this is a 2-part fault.
Yep.
One, your bank is not going to lead with the highest yielding product. Like, they're incentivized to pay you nothing or close to nothing. They take your money and lend it out and get that 4 or 5%. So they're receiving the market yield while paying you well below the market yield. Okay. Mm-hmm. The second part is you have to take some ownership. Like, I saw this same study and it said like the average yield the American consumer was getting on their cash was like 0.007, something absurdly low.
Yeah.
So if you have a boatload of cash, let's say you're saving for a house, or you're just one of those folks that likes to hold cash, find a friendly home for your cash. This is the first time in over a decade where you can do nothing and get 4 to 5% on your cash. So money market, CD, and it's going to take some effort, because again, your bank is going to hide and play games with you. So go in and talk to your banker, go in and talk to your bank and say, hey, is there a better product for my cash? Schwab has if you have a Schwab account, they usually have a menu of money market funds where you can go in and look and invest. So again, you need to take some ownership, but there's certainly no excuse to have cash and not be getting the current market rate.
And moving on to the next one. They titled this one, Don't Just Listen to Anyone. This came from Investment News. And they said that over half of Gen Z and millennial investors rely on social media for investing information. But a study from a Swiss Finance Institute, but a study from the Swiss Finance Institute found out that 56% of quote unquote finfluencers or finance influencers showed negative skill and underperformed peers by about 2.3% monthly. Not surprised. Not surprised. Monthly.
So annualized, that's like 24% a year.
Mm-hmm.
Man, there's so much going on here. Okay, so you said Gen Z and Gen X.
Gen Z and millennials rely on social media for investing information.
Okay, so tell me what a Gen Z is.
I think Gen Z is
you, right? Is that you?
I think so. I'm like right on the cusp. Gen Z is known as the Zoomers, the demographic succeeding millennials and preceding Generation Alpha. This is mid to late 1990s through the birth years of about 2010.
So like 25 to 34?
Yeah.
Okay, and then I don't know what I am. I've been called a Gen Xer, a millennial. I'm 42. I'm kind of on the...
I think the upper cusp of millennials.
So I feel like I've been talking about this a lot. You need to find an information filter.
Yeah.
And we're getting hit from every angle, comes 24/7. You know, you wake up, first thing you do is look at your cell phone. There's news headlines. If you're on social media and you're taking advice, you are doing it wrong. And that's putting it nicely. Anybody on social media is trying to get clicks, opens, and engagement. That's how they're paid. So they often say crazy, outlandish stuff to get your attention, to get eyeballs. That's all they care about. Monetizing their channel, monetizing their Twitter account. That's all they care about. They don't care about your outcome. So if you're a rudderless person just clicking buttons online, you're doomed to fail. Like, you are going to make some horrid decisions. And it really is alarming to me that so many people are getting their information on social media, because this is the second layer. The SEC, the regulatory bodies, this is not on their, like, it's on their radar, but these folks can say whatever they want. I can't say whatever I want, but they can say whatever they want. Mm-hmm. So no one's watching them. They're shilling crap. And again, you're just setting yourself up for a lifetime of misery, which is probably why there's such a knowledge gap in this country, and you're getting people in ruts and financial holes just because they don't have an information filter.
Yeah, I think there's some great influencers. There's some obviously not so great, so it's hard to pick out the ones that have good information versus don't. But where regulation kind of comes into this, I actually saw a video not that long ago where someone was talking about why there are not a lot of legitimate financial advisors on social media. And that's because of what we are bound by and the compliance issues and things with talking about money online. And this person that was talking about it said that they gave up their licenses. They're not practicing as an advisor anymore. It's because they want to be able to provide this information online without the confines of the regulatory powers that be. So kind of interesting, but there's no regulation. So you can literally say whatever you want. People give tax advice. They give all sorts of things online. And some of the stuff is like so off base.
So that's backwards to what a normal person might think. And I'm just thinking about our blogging process. So I've written a blog every week for the last 7 years. And that whole process from a compliance standpoint is quite daunting, where I write the blog, and I've been doing this a long time, so I know what I can and can't say. But every now and again, compliance will find something that I said that maybe could be a little softer. So Colin, who's our head of compliance, will scrub that every single week, come back to me with edits. During an SEC audit, the SEC will look at our website, they'll look at the blog, they'll check out a podcast or two, just to make sure we're not saying anything ridiculous. So they're very much is a regulatory lens on our stuff. To your point, social media doesn't have any of that, which goes back to engagement and clicks. The more outlandish things you say, the more engagement that you're going to get, which a complete misalignment of incentives for someone looking for reasonable advice.
Yeah. I think that a lot of these people are a good gateway for people who know absolutely nothing. It might get them started on the right path or started to find a valuable resource. But once you move past the basics of the basics, kind of have to level up a bit.
Right. And that can go the other way too. Like if you are just getting started, you stumble across the wrong person, you get down the wrong path, like that could really have a bad impact.
Yeah, true. So be careful where you get your information from. That's where most of the generation that is coming up and is kind of building wealth is where they're getting their information from.
Well, and one more thing on that. So when I come across a prospective client or a client and they're coming at me with conspiracy theories or sharing doomsday videos, I'm like, what in the heck have you been reading? And we start there and unwind it. And look, I'm not saying bad things can't happen, but the thing people are talking about seldom is what derails markets. It's always the risk that's lurking in the bushes that no one is talking about. So again, we lean into evidence, we lean into history, and I think that helps you understand the range of probabilities. I just wrote a blog about thinking in probabilities, and that's a much cleaner way to approach things, because one of the most dangerous traits of an investor, and I think this is at the symptom of what people seek out, especially on the doomsday side, is needing a sense of certainty. Like humans crave certainty. And I think when you approach investing like that, you are set up to fail. So think in probabilities. And, looking back at 100 years of market data, roughly 70% of the time the market goes up, 25% of the time the market goes down or it gets really weird, and 4 to 5% of the time the market's just flat.
Yeah, you wrote a great blog on that recently, so we can link that in the description as well. All right, we've got a couple of more. Next one touches on housing, and then we've got some stuff with crypto, digital payments. So let's keep going. So here's this one about housing prices, more supply, higher prices. So this kind of goes against the traditional supply and demand basics of economics, but this came from the National Association of Realtors, and they said that inventories of existing homes rose to the highest level since December of 2020 in April of this year. Monthly supply was the highest since December of 2019. Even with inventories rising 22% this year, the median existing home sales price increased to a record of $404,000 for a home.
I might have a theory on that.
Would you like to share?
Perhaps. So, think about the last few years. Many people are unwilling to give up their 2.5% to 3.5% mortgage that they captured in 2020, 2021, first part of 2022.
Yeah.
Right. That's a difficult trade. Say you are living in a house, you start to have kids, you're outgrowing your house, but you're paying a 2.5% rate on your mortgage. There's a house down the street that is bigger, has a bigger yard, and you want to live there. It's a little more expensive, but the big deal for a lot of folks is trading that 2.5% mortgage for a 7% mortgage. So that's really causing prices to stay high. It's been a supply issue. It probably still is a supply issue in some markets, but people are unwilling to put their house on the market because they'd be giving up that lower payment, that lower rate.
Right. So we'll see. There's a lot of people that say something has to give. Some people say this is just how it's going to be. Time will tell.
Well, I think if rates even go down a little bit, that'll unlock a lot more supply, because trading a 2.5% mortgage for a 4% mortgage is a better trade than a 2.5% for a 7% mortgage.
Yeah, a little bit of an easier pill to swallow. Okay. Let's look at cryptocurrency adoption.
Digital assets.
Digital asset adoption. A recent survey revealed that 14% of Americans have invested in or traded cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, showcasing the growing popularity of digital assets as an alternative investment avenue. 14% of Americans. Does that sound high or low to you?
to me, I think you have to segment it. Like if you're under 45, I bet that percentage is closer to 50 or 60%. If you're over 45, maybe 5%.
Much lower. Yeah.
Because young people do view this as money. And I realize Bitcoin, so I'll talk about Bitcoin here.
Yeah.
I realize Bitcoin is a polarizing asset class. Some people hate it and some people love it. However, when you look at the long-term thesis of Bitcoin, global payments, basically you're your own bank. You don't have to deal with a bank or the government. You don't have to deal with fees. You don't have to deal with someone telling you you can't or cannot access your money. When you look at government debt and politics and bureaucrats, the long-term thesis for Bitcoin is playing out right in front of our eyes. And those early adopters, those folks that were in Bitcoin's corner from the early days have been right. Like, you can still not like Bitcoin and admit those that were early, that like Bitcoin, have made a bunch of money in Bitcoin, were essentially right. And that's the thing that I question with the folks that refuse to change their mind on Bitcoin. Like, you can soften your stance a little bit. And again, I'm not going to shill Bitcoin, but I think like when you zoom out and you're objective, you can say whatever you want about Bitcoin. But a lot of the early adopters, the folks that believed in Bitcoin, that thesis is playing out and they've been right.
So we'll probably see that number grow over, probably explode over the next, I don't know, 10 years. But it would be interesting to see the age gap and how that is distributed.
Right. And the last thing I'll say is young people really do view Bitcoin as money. They view Bitcoin as a store of value, a safe haven, internet money. They have more faith in Bitcoin, a decentralized currency, than they do in the U.S. government and the U.S. dollar, which is crazy. But there are people that believe that with their heart and soul. And I'm not saying that I believe it, but I think that the two can exist. Fiat currency like the American dollar, the euro, and Bitcoin. I don't think it's exclusive anymore. And I think the institutional adoption, the Bitcoin ETF, large pools of smart money, investing in Bitcoin, that all supports that thesis of the two can coexist.
All right. Last but not least, we'll talk about digital payments. And I think that we're probably going to have very different uses for this, maybe. But this one says digital payments surge. In 2020, the global digital payment transactions surpassed 700 billion, reflecting a significant shift towards cashless transactions driven by mobile wallets, contactless payments, and online shopping habits. So my first question for you, do you use contactless payment options, mobile wallets?
Mobile wallets. Is that like Apple Pay or PayPal or Venmo?
That probably is included in the 700 billion, but Apple Pay would be one. You know, you double tap the screen, your wallet, all your cards show up, and then you can scan and you're donezo.
So I don't use my cell phone to pay for stuff just because all my work stuff is on my cell phone, but I'm a Venmo person. I use Venmo a lot. I've got an American Express. I use that. But I also always like to have I always want a little bit of cash.
Yeah.
For tipping and just,
sure.
It's nice to have options.
Yeah, sure. You never know when you're going to be in the situation where you need a little bit of cash.
Right. But one thing I've noticed, like you go to a Blazer game, you go to a stadium, many don't take cash, which is shocking to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, and something kind of interesting on the business side of things, we were looking at implementing some type of digital payment service here. And on the back end, the way that the fees and transactions are charged depends on your method of actually inputting information. So if you're physically typing in a card number, that's a different charge for the payment processing service. If you have a card on file that's ready to go, that's a little bit cheaper. If you're using a PayPal, Venmo, that type of kind of cash transfer, that's different than what an ACH transfer would be. So the pricing is really all over the place, but it was fascinating to see that the digital payment had a different pricing than whatever else.
The best use for Venmo for me is if you go out to dinner with a group, right? You have one person put down their card and pay for the meal. The rest just Venmo the person who paid. It saves the server a ton of time. I hate the 9 checks for 9 people. That's just stupid. It takes a bunch of time. So that's my best use case for Venmo.
That's a great use case for Venmo. That's probably mostly why it was created.
Yeah.
All right. That was Fact Check Truths and Trends. I thought that was a fun episode. So, any last words or comments?
No, I think that's good. It's kind of like a fact or fiction thing, or at least unpacking some of these headlines that don't make sense. I had no knowledge of what this was going to be, so I too enjoyed it. So good job, Erin.
Thanks. Well, check out the description for all of the things that we mentioned. You can always reach out to insight@pureportfolios.com for any questions, and we will see you in the next one.